Hello and welcome back to another video. This is our 21st video and I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us on all of these journeys, on all of these adventures to understand God's Word more. This video is going to be a little controversial, a little bit touchy, but we're not afraid of that. That doesn't scare us. We're going to focus on three parts. The first one, atheism and death, then atheism and the meaning of life, and finally, atheism and the absolute standard of moral value. In this video, we're going to focus more on how the book of Ecclesiastes applies to us personally and to the lives of our atheist friends. There are two words that we're going to mention quite a lot, and I need to make sure that we're all on the same page as to their definitions. The first word is objective. Something is objective if its truth value is independent of the person saying it. In other words, it is not influenced by personal feelings or opinions. For example, 1 + 1 = 2 is objectively true, and it is objectively true that people need water to live. The second word is subjective. Something is subjective when it is based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions. For example, when someone says, "It's so cold in this room," others may experience the same room to be hot. Or, "Strawberry ice cream is the best," which of course that's not true. Everyone knows that Rocky Road is the best. Let's start out with this question. What is the point of the book of Ecclesiastes? Well, Solomon sums it up well in chapter 12, verse 13. He says, "The end of the matter, all has been heard, for fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man." The section we're going to focus on right now is this part, the whole duty of man. The word duty is not in the Hebrew. Most translations use duty of man, or this applies to every person, and these words are not in the Hebrew text. Because this is our key text, I think we can do better, and we need to get to the bottom of it, so bear with me for just 1 minute. This is the Hebrew, ki zekol ha'adam, and literally it just means for this, all, the man. In biblical Hebrew, they don't need the present tense like we do in English. The to be verb is implied here. For example, they say in Hebrew, Ani Adonai. It means I, Lord. And we have to supply am. So we would say, I am the Lord. Or they would say, Ata ha'ish, which means you, the man. And we would have to supply are. So we would translate it as you are the man. So I don't think it's necessary to add the word duty here. If we are going to add a word, I think we should add means, because that's what I think the original author intended. These are all better translations. For this is man's all. That's great. Because this is for all humanity. This one is, I think, the best. For this is what it means to be human. Now, this word ha'adam means the man, but can also mean human in biblical Hebrew. They use this for humanity or human, or ben Adam means a human. So, if we are not careful, we can miss the fact that Solomon is actually telling us what the meaning of life is. He solved one of the biggest questions of the universe. The meaning of life is to fear God. So, with that in mind, let's get started with our first section. Ever wonder why so many rich and famous atheists commit suicide? Businessmen, singers, actors, athletes, we all know of some that have done this. I think it's because they were on the same path as Solomon in Ecclesiastes, and they reached the end of the path of their riches and wealth and being famous, and they saw what it really is, that it's vanity. This was so depressing to them that death was the better option. In the Czech Republic, where I live, around 1,500 Czechs commit suicide every year. That's roughly 4 a day. In the US in 2017, 47,173 Americans committed suicide. And 1,400,000 people attempted suicide. Globally, close to 800,000 people die from suicide every year. That's one person every 40 seconds. It seems like people are finding the end result of the many different paths that Solomon was on his journey to find meaning. And they see the truth, just like Solomon did, that life is meaningless. But why kill yourself? Why not just enjoy as much as you can for as long as possible? I think it's because it's not easy to enjoy something that you know is vanity and striving after the wind. To be happy and at the same time say that death is inevitable and nothing you do has any objective meaning whatsoever is an inconsistent worldview. More on that in a minute. Several prominent atheists knew this. Albert Camus, atheist French novelist, regarded life as absurd. What is absurd? Absurd means wildly unreasonable or illogical or inappropriate. He said, life is not merely meaningless, but twisted and cruel. There is only one really serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Deciding whether or not life is worth living is to answer the fundamental question in philosophy. All other questions follow from that. Wow. Bertrand Russell, an atheist British philosopher and historian, said that we have no choice but to build our lives upon the firm foundation of unyielding despair. So, atheists have a problem with suicide. Not all atheists, mind you, just the consistent ones, but more on that in a minute. What were the various paths that Solomon was on during his journey to find meaning? Well, he dabbled in pleasure, in alcohol and wine, in folly, foolishness, building and planting, riches, possessions, women, and knowledge, and more. And many or most people are on one or more of these paths today. And when they reach the end of this path, they see what Solomon saw at the end of all of his endeavors, that it's all meaningless, vanity, striving after the wind. So why keep living? This is a valid question for atheists. If death stands with open arms at the end of life's trail, then ultimately, what's the point? But Ecclesiastes does not end there. In 12, 13, and 14, Solomon says, "Let the conclusion of all these thoughts be heard, for God, fear God, and obey his commandments, for this is what it means to be human. For God will judge every deed along with every secret, whether good or evil." These verses are to me the answer Solomon was searching for all the years of his work and his journeys. It's like discovering the treasure at the end of a life of searching. Solomon did all the hard work for us. He went down all those paths. He suffered the consequences of them too. And he discovered the treasure. The treasure is that when we fear God, our life has objective meaning, and the things we do can have eternal consequences. Solomon says that the conclusion of life, or the conclusion of his book, is to fear God. What do we gain when we fear God? Well, we gain true wisdom. Proverbs 9:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." We gain true knowledge. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." Proverbs 19:23, "The fear of the Lord leads to life. Then one rests content, untouched by trouble." The fear of the Lord is the key to everything. Atheists are not the only ones who contemplate death on a daily basis. I contemplate death on a daily basis, and I think it's a good thing. God used death to bring me to salvation over 20 years ago. And ever since, I've had a biblical fascination with death. Psalm 90:12 says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." What does it mean to number our days? Well, it means to evaluate the use of time in light of the brevity of life. Life is short. But how would that help us to number our days? Well, it would help us to make best use of what we have, to focus on what's most meaningful in life, right? I've said it before and I'll say it again. A life lived with death in view is a more meaningful life. For me, death is like birth. And just like birth is the portal to life, death is the portal to real life, true life, full and lasting life. Death is the beginning, not the end. Not the end. As Christians, the reality of death should make our lives more meaningful. But for atheists, the reality of death only brings despair. Which brings us to our next section. Now, we have to figure out what the meaning of meaning actually is. And there are three concepts I want to point out in this context. The first is purpose. A car has a purpose. It gets you from one place to another. Do I have purpose? Significance. A goaltender plays a significant role in a hockey team. What does my life contribute to the universe as a whole? And lastly, value. A diamond has value. Is my life worth anything? Is it better lived than not? Is the world a better place because of me? But if life truly ends at the grave, and if God does not exist, then our lives have no objective meaning, purpose, significance, or value. Again, many prominent atheists recognize it and agree with it. Richard Dawkins, a strict atheist biologist, said, "There is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being." Oh, really? Is that what you think, Dawkins? Jean-Paul Sartre, an atheist French philosopher, denied that there are any objective values or meaning to life to be discovered, but rather that each person is free to invent for himself whatever values and purposes he chooses. The problem with this is that the universe does not magically acquire meaning just because we give it one. Suppose I give it one meaning and you give it a different meaning. Who's right? Neither of us. The universe without God remains objectively meaningless, no matter how we think of it. What Jean Paul is really saying is, let's pretend the universe has meaning. And this is fooling yourself. This is delusion. This is what we call subjective meaning. And many atheists live this way and have meaningful lives, but their lives are not meaningful because they are atheists. Their lives are meaningful despite their atheism. But more on that in a minute. Solomon saw this in Ecclesiastes. He recognized that if there is no God, then your life is not qualitatively different than that of a beast. He said, "The fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place. All come from the dust, and all will return to the dust." Solomon said, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanities. If life ends at the grave, then we truly have no ultimate or objective purpose for living." Okay, I realize all of this can be a little difficult to conceptualize, so let me give you an example that helps me. A few weeks ago, I was driving home from the mountains, and the roads there are really windy, and I'm driving in my old car pretty slow, and there came up behind me a woman driving a new red Mercedes SUV, and she was not happy that I was going so slow. She wanted to pass me, but she couldn't because the roads were so windy. So for 10 minutes, she was trying to pass me. She couldn't, but finally, she got her chance, and she passed me like a rocket, and she just disappeared down the road. After 10 minutes, I saw down the road a red light. And there she was, stopped there at the red light, and I came slowly behind her and stopped right behind her. And she was looking at me in her rear view mirror, and I was just smiling because I knew that everything she was doing, all of that stress she had, all of that anger that I was going so slow was meaningless, total vanity. Okay, one could say that, well, she had the more luxury, she had more excitement, more comfort, more fun. Okay, I could see that. If the police did not exist, and if this road was all there was, and if this red light was really the end, then yes, she had the fun, and I would be the one to be pitied. But if this red light is not the end, And if there's a policeman waiting behind it, then she's the one to be pitied, not me. Isn't it interesting that depending on your belief system, your paradigm of meaning shifts? Interesting. Solomon knew this, and he said that the light will turn green and that there is a policeman waiting for you behind it. He said, "For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether good or evil." Atheist philosophers believe that only by recognizing that life is truly a terrible thing and the world is a horrible place that we can successfully come to terms with our life. They say that we should honestly recognize the absurdity of life and then live in love for one another. But this solution has a fundamental problem. It is impossible to live a consistent and happy life within the framework of such a worldview. What do I mean by living consistently? Well, it is inconsistent to say that life is objectively absurd, which is what they say, and then say that you can just create meaning for your life. It does not make sense. And consider the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, the gradual decline into disorder. As the universe expands and energy is dispersed, all that's waiting for every living organism is death and extinction. There will be none to remember. So what I mean by objective ultimate meaning is that if that's true, if that's what's waiting for us, then ultimately it doesn't matter if you fought for peace or war or love or hate. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. If you live consistently, you will not be happy. If you live happily, it's only because you are not consistent. And that's why atheists have a problem with suicide. The honest ones recognize this. The dishonest ones make up some fake meaning for their lives and thus deceive themselves. Only a theist can live happily and consistently. A theist believes life has objective, ultimate meaning through an eternal God. But there are atheists with meaningful lives. Atheists certainly do have meaningful lives, but that's only because their atheistic beliefs are false. This in no way proves that God does not exist. For example, someone can deny the existence of oxygen yet still live a healthy life, right? That doesn't prove that you can be healthy without oxygen. It only proves that people can have beliefs that are at odds with reality. Dr. William Lane Craig, the foremost Christian apologist of our day, said, "Since there is no objective purpose to human life, none of our pursuits have any objective significance, however important and dear they may seem to us subjectively." And it gets a lot worse for atheists. Dostoevsky said, "If there is no immortality, then all things are permitted." In other words, if death is all that awaits us, then there is no objective reference point for good and evil. Interesting. Let me give you an example that is often used to illustrate this point. Now imagine that you're this little guy floating around in outer space, and there's nothing around, no stars, no planet, no space station, nothing, just you. How can you know what is up and what is down? You can't, because without an objective reference point, up and down don't even exist in this situation. But if a planet and some stars did appear, that would give you some objective reference point for you to orient yourself, for you to know what is up and what is down. God's nature is the same. God's nature provides us with an objective reference point for moral values. It's the standard against which all actions and decisions are measured. Bear in mind that verse from Solomon, "For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil." But if there is no God, then there is no objective reference point. All we're left with is one person's viewpoint, which is no more valid than somebody else's viewpoint. This kind of morality is subjective, not objective. Subjective morality applies only to the subject and is not valid or binding to anyone else. Historian Stuart C. Easton sums it up well when he writes, "There is no objective reason why man should be moral, unless morality pays off in his social life or makes him feel good. There is no objective reason why man should do anything save for the pleasure it affords him." Atheists believe that morality is an accident of evolution, a social convention. But this would mean that racism, slavery, and cruelty aren't really wrong. They're just not popular. Some atheists have attempted to create their own objective standard for right and wrong. They say, if an action leads to human flourishing, then it is objectively good. And if it doesn't, then it's objectively evil. But who gets to decide what contributes to human flourishing? Hitler was convinced that killing millions of Jews would promote human flourishing. Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, and who was in many ways worse than Hitler, thought that forcing poor people to be sterilized would lead to human flourishing. Kai Nielsen, an atheist philosopher, said, "Pure practical reason will not take you to morality." William Lane Craig again, he said, "To kill someone or to love someone is morally equivalent. For in a universe without God, good and evil do not exist. There is only the bare, valueless fact of existence, and there is no one to say, you are right and I am wrong." But if Christianity is true, then we are all here for a reason. Life does not end at the grave. God is the absolute standard of morality. God knows us and loves us and created us with meaning and purpose. We can live a life that is both happy and consistent. Let me leave you with Paul's words from Philippians 1. He said, "I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain."